Multiplicity as a vital part of nature. I talk by the voices of JARVIS. Hey all, and thanks for being here with us listening to our talk on empowerment through science. So before we introduce ourselves, we would like to introduce you to our system's favorite creation of nature. It is one of the most pluralesque organisms that we know of. So I will now show you a picture, and I would like to ask you all to type in the chat your guesses what this could be. I will give an image description in a minute, but first of all I would like to give you a few hints. So this creature lives, but it's not an animal, and it's not a plant, and it's not a fungus. Most of the time they live as a single cell, but they're not bacteria, and they can switch to function as a multicellular organism, and they have more than 2 biological sexes. I will now describe the image without hopefully not giving away too much. So we can see there's a dark background, and in the front the creature is kind of whitish, almost transparent. There are little strings going up into the air, and on the top of it there's a bowl-like shape with a little droplet on top of it. There are multiple of them, and it looks like they grow out of the floor, the bottom of this picture. I will reveal later in this talk what this organism actually is, and meanwhile, please type your guesses in the chat now. And I will just continue with introducing ourselves. So, we are the voices of JARVIS, and we identify as plural, and we align mostly with OSDD systems. We use he, him pronouns or plural they. And to give you a brief overview of who we are, where we're coming from, and so that you get a rough idea of what experience we have or don't have, here is our social location. So we are white in an able body, we are neurodivergent, we are queer and genderqueer, we were born and raised in the west of Germany during the 90s, we come from a middle-class family, we had or have access to higher education, we got a PhD degree, and we also lived abroad for 5+ years within Europe. For one reason or another, we collectively became natural scientists, and we feel very passionate about nature and also teaching, as well as cultural diversity. We aim to cultivate acceptance and understanding, and we like to help making education and research more accessible for all. As a self-discovered system, it is especially important to us to empower other plurals and raise awareness about plurality in all its forms and colors. We love sharing our knowledge and what inspires us for an empowered plural life. I myself, who is talking to you right now, my name is Matt, and I use he, him pronouns, and I am just the speaker for today. All the work for this talk has been done by all of us, mostly my headmates, and I'm basically that one person in the group work who does nothing, but in the end gets all the credit for the presentation. But enough about me, enough about us. What's this talk actually about? We would like to discuss with you all the question, is it actually really that odd to be plural? That multiple individuals come together, work, behave, and function together as a cohesive one. Is it really that strange or unusual to cooperate, compartmentalize tasks, share resources, and survive as a unit? The short answer is no, it is not weird at all. Multiplicity is not only happening in our heads, it's happening everywhere around us in nature. And we would like to take you all onto a tour through the wonderful world of nature. And we want to show you what inspired us to accept ourselves as yet another awesome system and part of nature. A quick word about triggers. During this talk, we will show you some footage of ants, and if you feel uncomfortable with that, we will tell you right before that, so you can close your eyes during that time. And we will also briefly mention the death of non-human and non-animal-like organisms. And without further ado, let's get on with the talk. I would like to start with an example of multiplicity in nature, which many of you are probably very familiar with. And I'm talking about flocks of birds and fish schools, for example. I'm going to show you now a bit of footage of a flock of starlings. So we see a lot of small single birds. And they all form this big swarm, and they form these big blobs of birds. And they move through the air, and this blob that it almost looks like some kind of liquid that deforms and takes on a lot of different shapes. Small blobs, big blobs. They squeeze together and then expand again. And it's such a super mesmerizing show, basically, that these starlings present to us. So let's take in this moment, this beautiful show of these incredible birds. And these blobs of birds, they somehow remind us of how our sense of identity sometimes feels like. Our consciousness is this blob of individuals, and it is ever changing and deforming and squeezing and expanding all the time. And this is how we try to navigate through our world, hoping to not bump into each other. And next, I would like to show you another example, a school of fish. Or schools of fish, many different fish. We don't even know what kind of fish they are. If you recognize any of the fish species in this footage, please let us know in the chat. So, just like the birds, or similar to the birds, the fish form these big groups that move collectively together. They swim in a row next to each other, form a straight line, moving in the same direction, or they are just shoaling together, all moving in their own direction but still grouping together. Some of them are slow, sometimes they are faster, probably trying to avoid predators, or they try to seem bigger because a big swarm of birds or a big school of fish seems so much larger and more threatening to a predator than a single small fish. Now, as we are watching these, one question arises. How do they not collide? How do they move together without ever bumping into each other? Without having one fish or one bird commanding them? There's no leader bird or leader fish who tells the others where to go, which direction to take. They all just do it. And even researchers are baffled by this, and it's a hot topic in current research. And this feature is known as self-organized behavior. And it's very common in nature, actually. And it happens on very different scales and dimensions, and comes in very many different forms. So if we look at humans, for example, we see it every day, everywhere. When you walk through a busy city, for example, people moving as these streams, almost like rivers, through the streets or through the shopping mall. Architects actually design shopping malls in a very specific way, such that the flow of the masses of people move coherently through the mall, so that they're not clogging space and maybe clogging emergency exits and so on. It doesn't always work perfectly. No human is perfect. But there is research out there. Researchers working on these, on collective motion. And this feature, the self-organized behavior, this collective motion of birds and fish and humans and other beings, it just resonates with us so deeply as a system. And we would like to show you a few more examples of this collective behavior and self-organization, as it has been also part of our own studies and research. At one point in our life, we ended up studying what is called complex systems. And honestly, we still can't get our head around the fact that we've been basically studying ourselves without actually knowing it. Of course, the research field of complex systems doesn't research plurals or DID or OSDD whatsoever, which is unfortunate, of course. And we wish that there was more research available on plurality inside the framework of self-organization and complex systems like we have in nature. Because we actually see a lot of similarities and a lot of overlaps between plurality and self-organization as scientists study it. But before we dive more into it, let's first of all clarify, what do we actually mean by a complex system? First of all, complex is not the same as complicated. And to demonstrate it, here's a very simple example. Here's a picture of a pile of wood. There are just a few planks piled up together. Now this is wood. There's not much we can do with it. We could maybe burn it and we will have a warm night. However, if we rearrange the wood, if we take each of the pieces, each of the individual pieces, and put them together, arrange them in a certain order and form bonds between the pieces, then we get a chair. And the chair is so much more versatile than a pile of wood. You can sit down on a chair and rest on it if you're tired. You can climb on the chair, stand on it, and reach higher places. Or if you have a visitor coming over, you can offer the chair to your visitor and let them rest and feel at home at your place. A chair is more than the sum of its parts. It's more than a pile of wood. And we find it so fascinating because it feels like that there is this invisible net that holds the parts of the chair together. And not just in the chair, but in every kind of complex system. There are these invisible relationships between individual parts. And on the surface level, we see something new. The relationships, the bonds, it creates something new, something bigger, something that we couldn't see before. Something that is more than the sum of its parts. And that is a very common definition of complexity. Now, what do you think about complexity? Do you guys have a good example of what a complex system could look like? Please type it in the chat or in the comments if you're rewatching this. Now, to get back to the world of animals and other critters, here's a great example of this principle of complexity and self-organized behavior. Ants and colonies. So I'm now going to show you some footage of ants. So if you are uncomfortable with that, please close your eyes for a moment. I will tell you once they are gone. Ants coming in 3, 2, 1, go! So first we would like to introduce you to our favorite ant species, which are the yellow crazy ants. They are yellow. They have a bit longer legs than usually ants have, and they run around in this very fuzzy, crazy movements, which gives them the name yellow crazy ants. And in the footage, we see them buzzing around, carrying eggs, grooming each other, just ants being ants, doing their business, running around, searching for food. They always seem busy. When you watch ants, they're always on the move. They're always doing something. And I know some of you might disagree with us, but we think ants are not just incredibly cute, but they are also incredibly fascinating creatures. And as a system, we kind of resonate with them. Now you all may say, but Matt, I'm not an ant and we are not a colony. We share a body, but ants all have their own bodies. What does that even have to do with plural systems? Well, here's the answer. Or here's our answer. Ants function together as one collective superorganism. They share the same genes, so they have one single queen, and that queen gives birth to many, many daughters. So they all have the same genetic background. And so this makes ant colonies a little bit different from what we know from other animal groups or human societies. Because humans or animals in a group are usually not necessarily genetically connected. We can all have families and siblings, but in ant colonies form these large, you could say, cultural structures, but they are all genetically kind of the same. They all worker ants from the same queen, and the worker ants can't even reproduce. So it's almost like the whole colony acts as one single organism. But what makes ants really seem like one single body is the fact that they share a stomach. Not literally, of course, so each individual ant has their own stomach or digestive system, but ants have the ability to share the nutrients they take up with their comrades in the colony. So when they meet each other, they can just share the resources with each other. And so they keep a relatively evenly distributed level of nutrition among the colony, as if they have one single stomach in one single body. And coming back to the yellow crazy ants, they are even more special. They are not just one queen, one colony, one organism. Yellow crazy ants have the habit that they can live together with multiple queens, which is very unusual for ants in general, but yellow crazy ants often have more than one queen. And so they have worker ants with different genetic backgrounds, but they still cooperate with each other. They still all function together as one single colony, even though they are, by definition, not one single colony. And whether there's one queen or multiple queens, ant colonies usually serve one common goal. So here I'm showing you some footage of ants building a nest for their colony. So they all want to have a home for their colony, and they are digging these tunnels where they all can live together. And even though there are like hundreds and thousands of ants all digging tunnels seemingly randomly, they still serve this one single goal. In the end, they will build their house for their colony. And the most fascinating about ants is how they divide their tasks and their roles. Exactly like we sometimes experience this in societies and families, and even in our plural systems. So the leafcutter ants are a great example for this task division in ants. They have specialized ants, so we see some ants here cutting leaves from a tree, and other ants who will collect these leaves and bring them back to the nest. And then we have ants who are farmers, who use the leaves to nurture fungi. So the ants don't eat the leaves, they actually use the leaves to grow fungi, and then they eat the fungi. And in these leafcutter ants, you can see something that is also very common in many ant species, is called dimorphism. So some of these ants are larger. You can see that they are larger than others. So some of them have really large heads and really strong jaws for cutting the leaves or also defending the colony from intruders. And others are smaller, and they are more specialized in farming or taking care of the young ones, the eggs and the larvae, for example, or taking care of the queen. So we have caretakers, we have leaf cutters, we have leaf carriers, we have farmers. And here I'm showing you some footage of weaver ants who build a bridge between a gap on their path to probably find a resource. So some ants take up the role of becoming the bridge, becoming bricks of the bridge that they are building. So they hold tight onto each other, and the more ants coming together, they slowly bridge the gap, and other ants can just walk over the bridge while the others still hold tight. And similarly, fire ants often build rafts during a flood. So when water levels are rising and the eggs or the nest is at risk of being flooded, some of the fire ants come together and they hold onto each other and build these rafts, while other ants can swim of this raft floating on the water surface, and the others, their task is to secure the eggs and make sure that the queen of the colony is safe. And what we find most fascinating about this is that not a single ant is in command and telling the others what to do. Even though there is a quote-unquote queen, she's actually mostly only there to start the new colony and lay new eggs. But the queen never tells her workers what to do. They're all doing it because they have this innate instinct and program to fulfill their tasks. And the question is, how do they actually do this? How do they self-organize themselves? And ants usually communicate through pheromones, and so when they walk on a path, they leave trails of pheromones, and other ants can smell that and walk the same path. And so if one ant finds a food source and others follow them and more ants will follow that route, then these pheromone trails become stronger and stronger. And so sometimes you probably have all seen this before, a trail of ants, a street of ants just walking on one line. And they all walking on the same street because of those pheromones that they leave. And this is almost like biochemical communication, a bit like electrochemical signaling along neural networks in a brain, for example. But coming back to humans and plurality, and some of you might think this is a little bit far-fetched, but we see some parallels between ant colonies and plural systems. We function as one single organism, but we are also all autonomous individuals. And at the same time, we are dependent on each other. We communicate and we cooperate. We all have our specialized roles or characteristics and find our individual places within the system. And by dividing our tasks and cooperation, the ants can do so much more as a colony than they could do as an individual ant, or in our case, as an individual system member. And this is all we had to say about ants, so there will be no more ant footage coming from here on out during this talk. Whew. Let's take a deep breath. That was a lot about ants. We now want to go even smaller than ants. We now want to talk about cells. And for that, we will show you first the picture again that we showed you at the very beginning, where we asked you to guess what it is. So, again, here's the picture of this organism, our favorite organism, a very plural organism that looks like little strings, little almost transparent strings that grow into the air, a bit like a mushroom. And on the top they have this little ball, kind of like a small balloon, with a little droplet on the top, on the tip of it. So this organism, we will tell you in a bit what it actually is, but this organism lives as a single-celled organism, like a bacteria, but it's not a bacteria. So for example, plants and animals in comparison, they are multicellular organisms. So they are made up of many individual cells. Now, have you ever wondered how single cells actually come together, work together, and form a single body or organism? Even scientists keep wondering about this and how multicellularity actually evolved. It's still an open question and a part of current research. And we personally wonder if the evolution of plural consciousness is somehow connected to this. And one organism could give actually a potential answer to all these questions. And it is our favorite organism that we've shown you in the picture. They are a kind of slime mold called dictyostylid. I hope I said it right. In short, it's just called dicty. They are not a bacteria, but they are also not categorized as animal, plant, or fungus. So they're basically out of the box, and even biologists can't really decide on a label for them or in which category to put this special organism. And a little fun fact, they do not only have 2, but actually 3 genetically distinct sex types. And they are actually also known as a social amoeba. So why are they called social? This is best understood when looking at their life cycle, and for that I'm going to show you a little bit of footage again. So first we see the individual single dicty cells. We look at them from a top view from above, and they just do what cells do. They just wiggle around, minding their own business, and they have a lot of food available. You can't see the food, but they are eating up some nutrients on the floor that they are on. And while there is a lot of food available, they just behave as these single individuals. But as soon as the food level decreases, they start to move towards each other, and they form these collective structures. So here we see in the footage how they are moving together. They look like, first they have a central point where they are all moving towards, and on the outside, but like branches, on these branches they come together to this central point. And next we see how once they come together, they start forming these stalks that we have seen in the picture before. So we are looking now from the side at how these stalks form, and they start out as this small blob, and then a thin stalk rises up into the air, grows and grows and grows, and the balloon-like shape on the top forms. So they grow a bit like a mushroom would look like. And why are they doing this? So the cells at the bottom, that form the stalk, they will eventually die, while those at the top in the balloon, they will become spores, so that the dicty cells can reproduce again and find further food sources. And this behavior is considered as social because, unlike, for example, in a mushroom, all the individual cells are actually individuals, and they are not necessarily the same genetically connected organism. They are all individuals sacrificing themselves for other individuals from a different individual organism, which is termed as a social behavior. And so the dicty, the social amoeba, they can switch between acting as a single-celled individual or coming together, many individuals coming together and acting as a group, like social animals do, for example. And for them, it is a very neat survival mechanism and a way of coping with a rough environment when, for example, food sources become very low. So now, why do we find it so fascinating and interesting as plurals? Organisms have evolved from being singular cells to forming multicellular organisms. And this social amoeba here, the dicty, is an example of bridging that gap. They are sometimes singular and sometimes multiple. And this sounds so familiar, doesn't it? Some humans experience themselves as a singular consciousness, while others are multiple. Some even switch between these two states. So, to conclude this whole talk, we would like to briefly talk about the evolution of consciousness. So we have seen that multiplicity is a vital part of nature. It has evolved multiple times on different scales of life, from small cells to animal groups, even in sociology and psychology. We, as plural systems, and also humans in general, are yet another example of complex systems and collective behavior. And if we think about consciousness in the context of the lifetime of Earth, or even the whole universe, consciousness is such a new concept. And in a way, something like having an identity is still in an experimental phase of evolution. And so, the way that we see it personally, through the lens of science, is that multiplicity or plurality is just another part of evolution and natural diversity. Now, after seeing so many different examples of multiplicity in nature, we would like to know what was your favorite part in this talk. And do you maybe have more examples of multiplicity in nature? Please let us know. Thank you all for listening. And many thanks to the organizers of the Plural Positivity World Conference 2023 for giving us the chance to talk here and share our ideas. We are the voices of JARVIS, and you can find us on our website, jarvissystem.eu. Thank you so much. Bye bye.